I now want to introduce our keynote speaker, Larry Whittlesey, who is the National Director of U.S. Mission Network for the YMCA. When I was the YMCA as a kid, there was a lot of C in YMCA. Hadn't been a lot of C for the last several years. And Larry's bringing the C back into YMCA, so let's welcome him.
Well, thank you. Good to see you this morning. Aren't you glad you're up this morning? Yes. How many of you just said a lie? Okay, we don't believe in that here. I want to continue to thank those who, it's an honor for me to be here and to thank the mayors and the civic leaders, the public officials who are here, and also to recognize our military personnel and our first responders. And obviously I want to congratulate Joanne for being the Citizen of the Year. What a great heritage that is for us. I also want to thank the Full Gospel Businessmen and the YMCA and the Serving Our Neighbors for being sponsors of this event, and the planning committee that puts this together every year. I've been here the last several years. It's been a great event, and I can't believe they asked me to be the speaker this year. I'm not sure how that happened, but I'm grateful to be here. And finally, I want to thank my colleagues, ministry leaders, business leaders, school administrators, teachers, nonprofit leaders, and all those in the business community, and you who are just concerned citizens who love this city. Thank you for being here. Now we're going to test your Christian obedience for just a second. When I was in seminary, I was told that the mind can only absorb what the seat can endure. And you've been sitting here for a while, and you've had a nice breakfast, and some of you are already sleepy, and we haven't even hardly started. So I'm going to give you 30 seconds. That's it, 30 seconds. This is your obedience test. I want you to stand up. I want you to shake hands with one or two people and tell them they look really good for this early in the morning. Stand up right now. All right. Let's see how obedient you are. You'll be seated. Thank you. Now we're testing them. Well, it's my privilege to be here this morning. I got to serve as a pastor for many years, and I enjoyed that opportunity. And for 5 years of my life in my ministry career, I went part-time in the church and worked full-time for Promise Keepers and traveled around the country and put on about 90 of those events. And the last few years I've been back at the church, and now for the last 4 years I've got to work for the YMCA and travel around the country. And I get to speak to a lot of different groups, mostly smaller than this, Y staff or something like that. But I heard a long time ago that people need to hear stories. And so someone found out that I was speaking here this morning and said, Larry, would you tell the Chippy story again? And so I want to tell you about the unexpected adventures of Chippy. If anyone here ever owned a bird, raise your hand. We owned a bird. Great. So you know, we had a bird we adopted in San Diego. He actually adopted my wife, walked up her arm, put his head on her shoulder, and said, I'm yours. And so we adopted, his name was Diego. That was very creative, wasn't it, San Diego? But Diego lived in my study at home for years. I had no idea. I've had cats and dogs and other pets. I had no idea how messy a bird is. My study for the next several years had feathers and dust and dirt and seeds everywhere all the time. And the worst job in the face of the world is cleaning the bottom of the silly bird cage. It's awful. You got to scrub it. That stuff's just stuck. It's awful. So Chuck Swindoll, who I'm sure you all know, a famous preacher, when he had teenage kids, he had a bird named Chippy. And Chuck loved that bird. Loved that bird. But he didn't like to clean the bottom of the bird cage either. Who would, right? Well, one day, his 15-year-old daughter volunteered to clean the bottom of the bird cage. Now, when a 15-year-old volunteers for anything, you say yes, right? And so he said yes, but she's 15, and she's looking for an easy way to clean the bottom of the cage. So she whips out the vacuum cleaner, and she gets it all put together with the hose and gets ready to stick the hose in the bottom of the cage to clean out all that gunk. But just as she's getting ready to put the hose in the cage, the phone rings. You're a 15-year-old girl. You can do something nice for your dad, or you can answer the phone. Which one of those two things do you choose? She answered the phone. She said hello. And about the time she said hello, she heard a sickening sound of and old Chippy had got sucked up into the vacuum. Her dad loves this bird. She doesn't know what to do. So she rips open the vacuum, rips open the bag. There's dust and dirt flying anywhere. And on the bottom of that bag, there's little old Chippy going, and she says, oh no, I've killed my dad's bird. She picks the bird up and she's trying to figure out what to do. So she rushes into the kitchen and she turns on the faucet and douses him in ice cold water. Now the bird is not only in shock, he's freezing and shivering. So she says, what am I going to do? She picks the bird up. She runs back to the bathroom. And she does what any 15-year-old girl would do. She gets out her hairdryer and blows the tarnation out of that poor little bird. And I love the way that Chuck ends the story. He says, Chippy survived. But he doesn't sing much anymore. Well, friends, I have a feeling there are a lot of people in our community who don't sing much anymore. They're tired and they're frustrated and they're overwhelmed and they're stressed and they're worried and they're hassled and they're lost. The life has been sucked out of them. They're drowning in the sorrow of their problems. They've been blown away by the broken relationships in their lives. They've been shocked by how the circumstances have turned against them. So how do we as a collective group of people help and comfort and assist and serve and guide and motivate them in an attempt to restore their sense of hope and joy and purpose and direction? How can we make a difference in those people's lives who aren't singing much anymore? Well, I think the answer to that question actually lies in the answer of a much more personal question. The question is this: what do you want to make out of your life? What do you want to make out of your life? I think that's a fair question for us to ask both individually and corporately. What are we making out of the opportunity we've been given with the time and the talent and the treasures at our disposal? Now, there's some people out there who just want to make money. They just want to acquire more stuff. There's other people out there who just want to make a name for themselves. They want to build a reputation. Perhaps you're one of those who is just looking to make memories, to experience new things, to see new places, to collect new stories. Maybe you're one of those who likes to make waves. You're one of those activists, cause-driven, passionate disruptors of the status quo. Taken further, there's a few who just want to make trouble. We've had more than our share of those lately, who want to create havoc and chaos and rebellion in the area around them. Perhaps your primary goal is to make friends, to build relationships and enjoy the people around you. During the time I've worked for the YMCA, I've known more than a few people who just want to make the right next career move, to move up the ladder of success in their career. Or perhaps your limitations or your aspirations are as limited as one guy asked what he wanted to make out of his life, and he said, I just want somebody to make me a sandwich. You know, what do you make out of your life? How are you using the time and the talent and the resources you have to make a difference in that world around us of people who aren't singing much anymore? What are we making out of our lives? All those things we talked about can be good things, but is that it? I would suggest that's not it. Because I think what we really want as human beings, what we really want, what we really need, what we crave for is not just for those things. But I believe what really fulfills us is when we can make a difference by passing through this life. So that we can lay our head on our pillow for the last time and said that something good happened because we were around. We want to make a difference. Now, like many things in life, that truth is actually Pretty simple. But it's not easy. It's simple to get up here. It's not easy to do out there, right? And yet if I read my scriptures right, it seems pretty simple. Like this one out of Micah. He said, but he's already made it plain how to live and what to do, what God is looking for in men and women. It's quite simple. Do what is fair and just for your neighbor. Be compassionate and loyal in your love. And don't take yourself too seriously. Take God seriously. That's simple, but not easy. Confronted with that same question almost in the New Testament, Jesus said this. He said, love the Lord your God with all your heart, your mind, your soul and with all your mind. This is the first and greatest commandment. And the second is love your neighbor as yourself. Simple, but not easy. So let me propose to you an outline of how I think we, as a collective group of people, can actually make a difference in this community that we live in. Now, I was told in seminary that you're supposed to tell them what you're going to tell them, then tell them, and then tell them what you told them, right? So I'm going to tell you what I'm going to tell you. Here's the first thing. There's 7 principles that we're going to look at today. That's not my point. I'm going to make one point in this message. If you only remember one thing, it's the one point I'm going to make. These aren't them. These are just the steps that make that point. But here they are. 7 keys. There could be 37 keys. But 7 keys that will make a difference in our community. 1, you have to continue to open our eyes, our ears, and our hearts. 2nd, we have to make an honest investment of our financial and material resources. 3rd, we have to offer the personal gift of our time and energy. 4th, we have to have an inclusive love for people of all races, cultures, and status. 5th, we have to have courage to face opposition and obstacles. 6th, we have to earn the respect through demonstrated integrity. And 7th, we have to seize the power of collective or collaborative effort. Now, what I really want you to know, my real point is this. Notice the first letters. Oh, I didn't put those on the screen for you, did I? That would have been really nice. Oh, it didn't move. There it is. Those are the 7 points. I'm sorry, I thought those were already on. They didn't move. Those are the 7 points so you can see them for yourself. I'll leave them there for just a second. And they're going to be on just a second again because I want you to see that the first letter of those points spell the word choices. The point I'm going to make for you today is that it's the choices that we make that will determine whether we make a difference in our community. Making a difference will depend on the choices we make as a group of people, as individuals, as organizations, as families, as churches, as YMCAs, as nonprofits. It's the choices we make that will determine whether we make a difference in our community. Remember what Joshua said to the people? He said, now fear the Lord and serve him with all faithfulness. Choose for yourselves this day. Choose for yourselves this day whom you will serve. What's your choice going to be? How do we serve God? How do we serve God? We serve other people. We make a difference. So how do we do that? Let's think about that first one. We need to continue to open up our eyes and our ears and our hearts. When I first started taking this job in the YMCA, I traveled to a bunch of Ys around the country that were supporting us, and I'd been on the job for 6 weeks in February of 2014. And I went to one of our supporting Ys in Minneapolis, and I went to one of their little branches called Elk River. It's about 20 miles outside of town. It was a commuter place where there were grocery stores and gas stations and restaurants, and that was about it. The Y was kind of the center of the community, and it was sat on the main road that went between downtown Minneapolis, Twin Cities, and Elk River. And about 80% of the people who lived in this little community worked downtown and drove right past that Y every day. So I was meeting in a room with about 30 people, 15 from that Y staff, and about 15 from a church that actually met at that Y building. And they didn't necessarily know each other, so the branch director was having them introduce themselves. And they were going around the room, and just for fun, he did what you might have done. He said, tell us something about yourself that we don't know. And so they're introducing themselves. The first guy was an elder in the church. He's probably about 70 years old. And if you don't understand football, this won't make any sense at all. But he said, but something that nobody in this room knows about me is that I'm a Chicago Bears fan. That was like fighting words. They're Minnesota Vikings. That was their arch enemy. It's like Oregon and Oregon State, Washington and Washington State. You know, they're arch enemies, so everyone laughed. Then some lady talked about her grandkids. And then somebody talked about their trip to Disney World. They got about halfway around the room, and there was this young lady, about 34, 35, blonde hair, very perky, outgoing, and it seemed like everybody in the room knew who she was. Her name was Mallory. And Mallory, everybody did know, because Mallory was the front desk person at the Y. And one of her responsibilities was on Sunday morning to open up the building so that the people from the church could come in. So that's what Mallory did. So everybody knew her. But then she said something that changed the entire meeting. She said, something nobody in this room knows yet is that I'm going through a really, really ugly divorce. You could have sucked the air out of that room. It was pin drop quiet. Nobody knew what to do. We're all funny, laughing, having a good time, and suddenly now this is a serious moment. Her friend sitting right next to her had no idea. Turned to her and said, are you okay? And she said, yeah, I'm okay. I'm going through this really good faith-based divorce recovery class, and if it wasn't for that, I would be a total basket case. And so her friends started asking her questions about the class. We're all sitting there like, what do we do, right? And she said, well, it's Thursday night. We use this particular curriculum. This person's teaching us. It's an incredible opportunity. It's very supportive. And then her friend says, well, how many people? This sounds like a great class. How many people come to this class? And she said, well, it's really just four or five of us ladies. And her friend looked puzzled and said, why do you think, if it's such a good class, why do you think it's so small? And even though I hadn't even been introduced yet, I could not have paid Mallory to give a better answer. She said, I think it's so small because it meets at my church. And I about fell off my chair because I had this conviction that we could do something like that at the Y. So I said, think about this for a second. What if we took that exact same material, the exact same person, we did it on Thursday nights at 7 o'clock, the same person led it, those same 5 ladies came, but instead of at your church, what if we did it, I don't know, how about right here in this room? And what if you who are a Y staff who are here this morning knew that on Thursday nights at 7 o'clock, besides our Zumba class and our spin class and our basketball league and our swimming lessons, we have this faith-based divorce recovery class? Do you think on an average week you rub shoulders with anyone in this gym who is walking through divorce and is hurting in here, but would never go to a church or a counselor to get the help they need? But if that class was right here, if we would open up our eyes and we did it right here, do you think they might come and actually get the help they need? And I heard everybody in this town drives right in front of your Y. 80% of the people drive right by your Y every day, twice a day. And you have a lighted signboard out front. I wonder, what if you put on that lighted signboard every once in a while, Thursday nights, 7 p.m., divorce recovery class? Do you think anybody that you live with right here is walking through divorce, is hurting in here, and needs the help, but would never walk through the door of a church or a counselor to get that help? But if that class was in a YMCA, that's kind of this neutral place between the faith community and the secular community, do you think they might walk through the door and get some help they need? And if you could do that for divorce, couldn't you do that for marriage or parenting or addictions or grief? You name it. It's like they had told me that day. They had 65 seniors in an exercise program called Silver Sneakers that met on Wednesday mornings at 10 o'clock. And I said to them, I wonder how many of those 65 seniors have already lost their spouse and they're grieving and they have no place to tail at. What if you got one of the local pastors here to come here on Wednesday mornings at 11 o'clock, right after that class is over, and that local pastor offered an alternative of a grief share class right here where they are? If we would open up our eyes and see the need, they're all around us. Because, friends, I'm convinced that everybody who walked through this door this morning carries with them a bag of life. And you ask them how they are, you might have just done that, and they probably said something like, fine, great, yes, I do look good for this early in the morning. Okay? By the way, I don't wear suits for everybody. I just want you to know that. Okay? But the reality is just below the surface. Just below the surface. They're dealing with real life. Marriages and kids and finances and addictions and self-esteem and grief. It's just below the surface. And if we could open up our eyes to see the needs, to see their hearts, to see the outreach, we might be able to make a difference. We will never make a difference until we open up our eyes and our ears and our hearts. Where are the needs in our community? Do we really see them? Are we listening? Do we care? Where are the Mallories all around us? Why does something like the Association for the Prevention of Cruelty of Animals raise more money than almost any other charity? You have any idea? I was shocked to learn this. They raise almost more money than any other charity in the country. Did you know that? Do you know why? It's really easy. Because we're moved by what we see in their stories. Because they put up pictures like this. As soon as he does it. He's got the TV on. There we go. They put up, that was kind of fun. Pictures like me. That was really good. That's why they raise money. They put pictures like this. Or they put pictures like this. The poor little puppy and the kitty. It's almost like they put up Puss in Boots saying, please give us money. And they raise money because people see that. Because the reality is we can pacify our conscience and remain unmoved and apathetic as long as we don't see or hear what's going on around us. Because a closed heart will never make a difference. You have to be touched by what you see, what you hear, before anything meaningful will happen. So what are those needs here in Clark County? What is going on? Well, it's stuff like this. It's homelessness and low self-esteem and grief and loss and child abuse and spousal abuse, elder abuse, loneliness, sex trafficking, rampant immorality, political turmoil, at-risk youth, third-grade reading levels, graduation rates, refugee relocation, theological heresies, hunger, drug addiction, adultery, pornography, racial prejudice, gang violence, financial distress, divorce, health issues, ideological divides, intolerance, hopelessness, lack of ethical integrity, violent crime, materialism, mental health, and the list goes on and on. That's why I didn't memorize it. Okay? There are so many needs around us. There is no shortage of need. There's often a shortage of vision, a shortage of understanding, of compassion, of involvement, of concern, of motivation. Where are the Mallories in our community? Where are the Mallories surrounding you every day? If we don't open our eyes and our ears and our hearts, we'll never make a difference. Second, if we're going to make a difference, we have to make an honest investment of our financial and material resources. We've already proven to you by all the different people who've stood that there's a lot of good stuff going on right here in our community. And there's a lot of great nonprofits and charities and service-oriented ministries and businesses that are reaching out like U.S. Digital to make a difference in our community. There is great work going on all around us, but it all takes money. I learned as a kid, my parents taught me early, a little song that said, God owns the cattle on 1,000 hills and the wealth in every mine. As an adult, I figured out, yes, God owns the cattle on 1,000 hills and the wealth of every mine, and he puts it in our checking accounts. And it's for us to use. Financial stewardship is the result of the choices that we make with what he's given to us. When those choices are made wisely, amazing things happen that can make a difference in our community. When they're not, things don't happen. So, for instance, right here in our area, there was a gentleman by the name of Melvin J. Murdoch. Anybody ever heard of him? He was a co-founder of Tektronix. He was innovative. He was an entrepreneur. And upon his untimely death in 1971, he directed 3 trustees to establish a charitable trust to do this: to nurture and enrich the educational, cultural, social, and spiritual lives of individuals, family, and community. Now, that trust started with a lot of money, $91 million. But since then, that trust has grown to over $1 billion, and it has distributed over $900 million in grants, many to organizations that are sitting right here today, including mine. What is that a picture of? Friends, that's a record of real stewardship. You don't have to have $91 million to make a difference in Clark County. What you do have to do is that you have to be willing to part with some of what you have to invest it in someone else. Again, that's simple. Simple. It's not easy, because that's mine. I have to give something of mine to make a difference in somebody else's life. It's like the man who was kind of miserly his whole life. Made money, had a good amount, but didn't use it at all for his family, enjoy anything. He just saved it all. He was a miser. And shortly before he died, he instructed his wife to take all of his resources, all of his money, put it in a shoebox, and put it in his casket, because he was going to take it with him. Now, his wife was so beat down from over the years of penny pinching that she agreed. And so the man dies. At the funeral, just before the guy comes to close the lid, his wife dutifully comes up with a shoebox, sticks it in the coffin, closes the door, goes back to her seat. When the funeral's over, one of her friends comes up to her and said, "You didn't really put all that money in the coffin, did you?" And she said, "Oh, no, I promised him I would. So I took all the money, I took it to the bank, deposited it, and then I wrote him a check for the full amount." If we're going to make a difference, we'll have to make an honest investment of our financial and material resources. Third, we're going to have to offer the personal gift of our time and energy. Time is a commodity of every good relationship. I don't care if you're talking about marriage or raising kids or friendships or work. It takes both quantity and quality. You don't let anyone fool you. You can't get away with just giving a little bit of time and say that's quality time. It doesn't work that way. Time is the commodity of any good relationship. Giving our time to something takes away time from something else. That's just the way it works, because we have a limited supply. Therefore, a decision needs to be made on how we're going to use our time and use it wisely. I would suggest, if we're really going to make a difference in our community, one of the choices we're going to have to make is to offer the personal gift of our time and energy. Right over here is a table for Teach One, Lead One. Dr. Lori was here last week speaking. That's how I ended up here, I think. And Teach One, Lead One is an amazing local organization. I just went on their website and it said this. They're in their 7th year of operation. They have now this year 82 mentors who are serving in 6 different schools and over 500 students. That's amazing. Let me tell you what that represents. That's 82 examples of people who are making the choice to give the gift of their time. I wonder what kind of impact that gift will have. Whose life will be changed? The students? Perhaps their families? Perhaps the educators? Perhaps the mentors themselves? Who will benefit from that gift? Unfortunately, too often we're so busy, our tendency is to look for ways to use our time for ourselves and not offer it to someone else. And we need to do so. Reminds me of the story of a teenage boy who used to read stories to his sister all the time. And he got kind of tired of it. And so he got an ingenious idea. What if I recorded stories and then she could play them? So he recorded several of her favorite stories and went to her, and he was very proud of himself and says, "Now you can listen to the stories anytime you want. Isn't that great?" And she said, "No, it's not great, because it doesn't include a lap." See, it wasn't the stories. It was the gift of time that the sister wanted. Thomas Edison said, "Time is really the only capital that any human being has, and the only thing he can't afford to lose." The Bible put it this way: "Look carefully then how you walk, not as unwise but as wise, making the best use of your time, because the days are evil." The time is ours to do what we want, whatever we want, whenever we want. We get 24 hours a day to make that choice. But if we want to make a difference, we will need to offer some of our time and energy as a gift to others. Fourth, we need an inclusive love for people of all races and status and culture. If anyone should be demonstrating the love of Christ to the diverse world we live in, it's those of us who call ourselves Christian. I sincerely believe that we can do that without compromising our faith, our doctrine, our ideology, our theological bent, or our moral standards. We can love people even if we don't agree with them. Why? Because, friends, God loves people more than anything. More than anything. You all remember the Exodus story. The people of Israel had been enslaved for 430 years. They got out through the plagues. They came to the edge of the Red Sea. They stopped for a while. Pharaoh's army was coming after them, blocked by a pillar of fire or a pillar of clouds. And the people are grumbling, and God makes a way as Moses stands on the edge of the Red Sea and raises his hands, and the waters part, and they walk right down the middle across dry land to the other side. Well, Pharaoh's not going to give up that easy. He's stubborn. So he's going to come right after him. So he goes out into the Red Sea, follows them in, and as he goes in, the waters come crashing down, and the Egyptian army is destroyed. There's a Hadithic story about a celebration that went on in heaven after that. The angels are all celebrating. The enemies have been defeated. The Jewish people have been saved. There's a great party going on in heaven. But then the angels notice something. God's not there. They're all celebrating, having a great time over this great victory, but God's not there. So one of the angels goes to Michael and said, "Where's God?" And Michael said, "Oh, God's outside by himself. He's weeping. You see, thousands of his children drowned today." I wonder, do we see people the way God sees people? He isn't anxious to shun or dismiss or judge or punish those who don't follow his plan. He loves them and he grieves over them. Yes, we live in a diverse society where people who are completely opposed to our deeply felt convictions and beliefs, but we must treat them with respect. We must listen to their hearts. We must be living demonstrations of God's love for all people. In fact, the YMCA mission statement says to put Christian principles into practice through programs that build healthy spirit, mind, and body for all. There's people who are Christians who struggle with that for all. That's a bunch of people who don't believe like us. That's right. For all. I don't see it as a challenge at all. We don't have to change who we are to be inclusive. We can truly love people and still disagree with them. Jesus proved that as he spoke to the woman at the well, or Zacchaeus, the tax collector. He was the demonstration of love without compromise. So if we're going to be Christ-like in our community, if we're going to make a difference to the world around us, we're going to have to make the choice to love people of all races and cultures and status, even those we disagree with. Fifth, we need to have the courage to face opposition and obstacles. Rarely is something significant accomplished without having to go through it. Do you understand what I mean? How many here have been through it, even this year? Raise your hand. Look around, folks. Look around. Rarely is anything accomplished until you go through it. You know, it's football season. They're saying this is the year of the running back in college football. Those guys amaze me because they're not the biggest guys on the field. In fact, the big uglies are in front of them on both sides. These guys get the ball and they run straight forward and they run right into these bruisers and they get this thing called yards after contact, yak. You know what that means? That means they hit the obstacle and they keep moving forward. These little guys sometimes are pushing the big uglies forward, the whole pile, because they haven't stopped when they hit an obstacle.
Life is like that at times. If we're going to make a difference, we must courageously face the opposition, and we must plow through those obstacles. This year at Global Leadership Summit, Bill Hybels introduced Angela Duckworth in a book that she wrote called Grit. And what grit means is simply doing that. You hit the wall and you keep pushing. You hang on. You're tenacious. You persevere. Henry Ford said that obstacles are those frightful things you see when you take your eye off the goal. So I heard a story a long time ago about a guy who was sitting on his patio. And he was watching this little ant carry a stick that was 3 or 4 times the size of the ant. And as he sat in his chair and watching this, he was kind of amazed watching this ant carry this big stick across the sidewalk, the patio. And then the ant came to a big crack, and he couldn't figure out how to get across it. He tried 4 or 5 different things, and the man sitting in his chair watching this little ant saying, what is he going to do? What is he going to do? And then he saw the ant do something amazing. The ant took the stick, laid it across the crack, walked over the stick, picked it up on the other side, and went on his merry way. And the man thought to himself, you know what? If we could be more like that ant, if we could learn to find the obstacles in front of us and find a way to plow through it or to cross over it, how much more could we accomplish? Now, let me tell you this morning, I don't know what burdens you're carrying. I don't know what obstacles are in your life, in your past, or your present, or what's waiting for you just around the corner. But I do know at times that those obstacles can seem insurmountable. Just like that sidewalk crack was for that little ant. There's no way around it. But if we will have the courage to take on that obstacle and the hardship, who knows what kind of difference we can make. I grew up in the era where desegregation was going on in the schools. Now, on the West Coast where I lived, that was not that big of a deal. But in places like New Orleans, that was a huge deal. And when that was ordered by the courts, many of the white parents said, we're not sending our kids to school. And they made it known that if the black kids came to school, they were having problems. So many of the black parents didn't send their kids to school.
Except for the parents of Rudy Bridge. She was 6 years old. She had been looking forward to going to her first year of school all summer. And so her parents sent her to school. With two U.S. Marshals in front and 2 U.S. Marshals in front, she walked through those heckling crowds. She went into a school that was empty except for her teacher, and she spent the day, and then she went home. And her courage changed everything in New Orleans. If we want to make a difference, we have to have the courage to face the obstacles and opposition if we're going to change our community. Sixth, we have to earn respect through demonstrated integrity. Now, truth is truth no matter where you find it, and you can even find it, believe it or not, on Facebook. I found this. It says no matter how educated, talented, rich, or cool you believe you are, how you treat people ultimately tells all. Integrity is everything. Integrity is perhaps the most valuable of all personal attributes, and it's a title that has to be earned through consistent action. C.S. Lewis put it this way: integrity is doing the right thing even when no one is watching. But let me remind you this morning, someone is watching. Amen. Most of the time. If you remember the movie that came out a few years ago called Bagger Vance, Will Smith plays an angelic caddy for Matt Damon, who is a war hero who is struggling with his game after seeing so many things in war. And golf is the only game I know where the player has to call penalties on himself, right? And at one point of that movie, Matt Damon is forced with that decision to call a penalty on himself because his ball moved. Well, that story acted out in real life to a professional golfer named Raymond Floyd, who you may have heard of. In a particular tournament, he was running for the first prize prize, $108,000, that tournament.
He was in front of the green, and he had a 9-inch putt. Now, friends, even I can make a 9-inch putt, right? I mean, it's this far. Even I can do that. But as he reached down to move this is out. That's what you're trying to tell me back there. I thought you were just being enthusiastic. Stay here. You're telling me to stay here. Got it. You know, I may not be the sharpest crayon on the box, but I figure it out sooner or later. Stay here. Okay. Where was that? Oh, Raven Floyd. 9-inch putt. Even I can make a 9-inch putt. But as he reached down to pick out a little leaf that was behind his ball, the ball moved that far. Less than a half an inch. It's a 9-inch putt. Nobody saw. But he called the marshal over and the person he was playing with and said, my ball moved. And they looked at him and says, Raymond, it's a 9-inch putt. It's okay. He says, no, the rule says my ball moves. I have to call a penalty on myself. And so he did. And he lost the tournament. Tony Dungy said, integrity is the choice between what's convenient and what's right. You've heard the phrase, don't talk to me about integrity, show me, right? This last year or so, you saw this film, Hacksaw Ridge. How many saw that? Yeah, almost everybody. It's the true story of Desmond Doss, an American pacifist combat medic. He was a Seventh-day Adventist. After the Japanese bombed Pearl Harbor, he, like many other young men in the country, rushed to join the military. The problem was he wouldn't pick up a gun. And in basic training, that caused him all sorts of chaos and confusion. In fact, they were going to discharge him at the last minute. He wanted a reprieve and was allowed to continue to serve in the military as a medic. There's a whole lot of people who went to the Battle of Okinawa who are happy about that. Because in that awful battle, the bloodiest battle in the Pacific during World War II, the enemy was entrenched on top of a ridge. His company was required to move up that ridge and try to fend off that enemy. And the first day they did that, they literally got killed, massacred. It was overrun. Many, many people wounded and hurt and killed on the ridge. He was the one who was on top of the ridge when the troops retreated. And over the period that followed, he personally rescued 75 wounded soldiers, pouring them down and praying while he did, God, give me strength to find one more before I die. He's the first conscientious objector to ever be awarded the Medal of Honor. You should have seen the respect the men of his company had for him after he demonstrated his integrity. If we're going to make a difference, friends, we've got to be Desmond Doss type people in our community. And finally, if we're going to make a difference, we have to seize the power of collaborative effort. This has been a major theme of my personal ministry my entire life. As a pastor, I was always the community guy. I think because God likes it when his kids get along. I really do. I tour a lot of YMCAs around the country, and I often see the spin room, which I call the torture chamber, because they're always led by some sadistic instructor who's always screaming the word, more, faster, give me more, faster. They're awful people. As you might guess, bike riding is not my favorite. And I especially wouldn't like to do this. Have a tandem bike race. These two guys were on this race. They were doing pretty well. They came to one final hill. It was really, really steep, and they knew it was going to be tough. And going up that hill was torture. Visions of that sadistic spin instructor were flying through their head. More, harder, faster. And they finally get to the top of this awful hill. And the guy in the front says, that was the toughest hill I ever had to climb. And the guy in the back says, you're not kidding, man. I was really worried. I pedaled hard, but I was pretty scared. And if I hadn't kept my brakes on the whole way, we might have slid right back. Friends, you got to work together. Something I'm still trying to learn is this phrase. If you want to go fast, go alone. If you want to go far,
go with others. You know, right here is Brandon Berg. He's the pastor of Rhapsody Church. That church meets with that group right there at the Clark County Y. These two organizations, completely separate, have merged together to serve the East Vancouver area in a way that's incredible. They feed kids. They do all sorts of projects together. They've learned that though they're not the same, they can collaborate together to make a difference in Clark County. There's a thing that I talk about as I travel around the country. I brag about Vancouver all the time. You don't know that, but I do. I talk about a thing called the Vancouver Faith-Based Coffee, run by a community health nurse, Ann Johnson, and a school official from Evergreen School District, Melanie Green. Once a month, these groups get together with faith leaders, with school leaders, with community leaders, with nonprofits, with pastors, and they tackle problems together. Does everybody in those groups agree with one another? No. You see, I found out that you don't have to agree. Successful collaboration doesn't require full agreement. It just requires full commitment by everybody involved to make a difference. And they solve problems together. Well, as a kid, I heard about a group of composers called Gilbert and Sullivan. I'm sure you've heard of them. They did 14 successful comic operas in a period of 15 years. They were amazing. They did things like Pirates of Penzance and Mikado and HMS Pinafore. However, I learned recently that those two gentlemen could not stand one another. They couldn't even work in the same room together. Sullivan was the guy who wrote the scores and was very sociable, and Gilbert was the guy who wrote the words and the stories and was kind of to himself and a workaholic. In fact, they broke up their partnership, even though they were incredibly successful. They broke up over the color of carpet in a theater they had just purchased. They collaborated for many years, though they didn't agree. What could we accomplish if we could collaborate more with others who are serving our community, many of those who are sitting right here in this room? If we could put aside the things that make us different from one another and actually work together to make a difference in our community. Too often we're like these two feuding brothers. They inherited the family farm. When the family farm was owned by Dad, it was incredibly successful. The two brothers had houses not too far apart on the land. When Dad died, they split the property, and they began to fight over everything, squabble over everything, to the point where one brother decided, the guy on the left, dug a big ditch between his house and the other guy's house because he didn't like his brother's cows crossing over to his pasture. That really made the other brother mad. So he decided he was going to build a fence so he didn't have to even see his brother's house. So he went out and bought the material and hired a carpenter, but he had to go away in business for a couple of days, but he told the carpenter, this is where I want the fence. I don't even want to see my brother's property. Came back in the end of 3 days, and there was no fence. There was a bridge over the ditch, and he was hot. He went running looking for the carpenter, but as he did, his brother came out of his house and was running across that bridge to his brother with tears running down his eyes and said, brother, if you can forgive me for digging that ditch and for all the squabbles we've had over the years and build this bridge so that we can be together, then I want you to know I'm sorry and please forgive me. And they had this incredible reconciliation. And after they had the reconciliation, they said, man, we got to find this carpenter guy. This guy's neat. We got to have him stay around. And they asked him to stay on at the farm to do some other things, and the carpenter looked at him and says, no, I'm sorry, boys. I have a few more bridges to build elsewhere. My question to you this morning is, are you building fences or bridges? Are we going to collaborate together, or are we going to stay separate and do our own thing? So what's the point of all this? Those are 7 great keys to make a difference. But I told you there's really only one point. The point is this. Not me. There it is. Choices. We choose whether or not we're going to make a difference, personally or in a community. Our choices and actions really do speak louder than our words. We have countless examples, even sitting here in this room, of people who are doing what is necessary to make a difference and impact others in our community. My challenge for all of us is to reconsider our choices this morning. As an individual, as a family, as a church, as an organization, as a YMCA, as a business, as a nonprofit, as a school, what choices are we going to make? Because it's the choices we make that will determine whether or not we make a difference. The question is not, can we make a difference? The question is, will we make a difference? Remember what the verse said? But he'd already made it plain how to live, what to do. What God is looking for in men and women, it's quite simple. Do what is fair and just for your neighbor. Be compassionate and loyal in your love. And don't take yourself too seriously. Take God seriously. Friends, this morning, I'd love you to take a moment to yourself sometime today and say, God, what kind of choices do I need to make? Because what I really want, what I really crave, what I really want to do with this time and talent and treasure you've given me, this life you've invested in me, what I really want to do is to make a difference. It's not can we, it's will we. What choices will you make? Thank you so much for allowing me to have the privilege to challenge you.